Hello, welcome to my channel. My name is Hannah and let's talk Les Miserables. So I'm starting this a day later than normal because yesterday I was not feeling good. Like, I was out of it for most of the day. I honestly did spend most of the day reading, but it was not Les Miserables. It was something a lot easier to read. Oh, Tarty is here already. But I read 2 chapters Sunday and I just finished 1 chapter today. So I have 3 chapters to catch you up on, but it's honestly not much because Victor Hugo is doing what he does best, which is overly describe literally every little single tiny detail of something that is completely not needed. So we are to the house where Cosette and Jean Valjean are, and this is why we're going into all this ridiculous detail right now. But essentially, he ended up buying this place. It used to be where this like rich guy would hide his mistress essentially because he didn't want people knowing about the affair or whatever. And so it's like this pretty big plot of land with at least 2 different houses on it. So like Cosette and Jean Valjean don't actually live in like the same dwelling. They are separated a bit and they only have like 1 housekeeper who's like this elderly woman and she stays with Cosette. And like there's a big garden, but he won't tend to it. He likes that it's like all overgrown and everything because it kind of gives the appeal that this place is like abandoned. And there isn't a lot of like foot traffic here or anything, so no one really notices it and no one even noticed that they moved in kind of thing. But it's supposed to be on Rue Plumet and I'm not sure if that's a road that actually exists here, so I'm gonna have to look that up. And I'm hoping later on, like when Marius comes to the picture, I'm hoping they say the number. But they have said some things to where I think I could narrow down where it's supposed to be, like if I looked at Google Maps or whatever. So I'll definitely have to do that at some point in this chapter. So the chapter today was just about the garden and how it's been neglected for 40 years and that there's all different kinds of like vegetation and animals and insects and stuff that live here. And then all of a sudden he just goes into like some existential stuff. This is on page 764 and he's literally just was talking about this garden and nature and everything. And then he says, "The science of mathematics applies to the clouds. The radiance of starlight nourishes the rose. No thinker would dare to say that the scent of hawthorn is valueless to the constellations. Who can predict the course of a molecule? How do we know that the creation of the worlds is not determined by the fall of grains of sand? Who can measure the action and counteraction between the infinitely great and the infinitely small? The play of causes in the depths of being, the cataclysms of creation." It just goes like on and on like that for pretty much the whole rest of the chapter. And it's just like, okay, I don't think I really absorbed much of what was happening there. So that's pretty much where I'm at right now. There's been absolutely none of the characters in these chapters, so the story itself hasn't progressed anymore. So I'm hoping that changes soon and we get back to what Marius and Eponine are up to. Can you not move silverware? That would be great. Oh, she's so cute. Yeah, Torty. It's you. It's you, Tart. Anyway, I'll check back in tomorrow. Of course, when I went to film, I get the hiccups, so that's probably going to be happening through this clip, but there it is. But I read a chapter of Les Miserables today, and I read one yesterday as well, and pretty much we're in the part where they're describing what happened with Cosette and Jean Valjean between the time that they entered the convent and now, essentially. It's mostly just that time when Marius had first seen them, and Tortilla's here. So the first chapter is pretty much just talking about how they left the convent because the gardener had passed away, and Jean Valjean wanted Cosette to see more of the outside world as much as he wanted her to just like become a nun and just like be his forever kind of thing. He wanted it to be like her choice, not him forcing her. So he wanted her to see Paris and people and all of that kind of thing. Hates art. And so they left when Cosette was 14. That's when they move into this like really secluded place with the garden and like the 2 houses and everything. And apparently when Cosette was really tiny, that's when Jean Valjean might tell her a little bit about her mother, but apparently like now when she asks, he doesn't say anything. She doesn't know that her mother's name is Fantine or anything, and she doesn't know where babies come from either. So Fantine is kind of like, well, maybe I really don't have a mother, or maybe like Jean Valjean is my mother. Like she kind of thinks like maybe her spirit resides in Jean Valjean and kind of use him as a parental figure that way, because she knows that he's not her actual dad or grandpa repas or whatever they're trying to pawn it off as. So that's pretty much that whole first chapter. And then the second one is pretty much Cosette figuring out that she's beautiful. And this is that 6 months between when Marius had seen them at the Luxembourg Gardens. And the title of the chapter is actually kind of funny. It's called "The Rose Discovers That It Is a Weapon of War." Because she knows that, like, if you're pretty, that's, you can use that to your advantage kind of thing. And pretty much she looked at herself in the mirror one day and was like, wait, am I pretty? And she's like, no, I couldn't be. And so she doesn't sleep that night, like, worrying about it. And so she looks obviously worse the next morning. So then she's like, oh no, I'm ugly, and doesn't look in a mirror for 3 months. And meanwhile, I guess she's basically hitting puberty. And so, oh, Torty just fell. And so pretty much other people are commenting on it, and the housekeeper even makes a comment about it to Jean Valjean that Cosette overhears. And so Cosette's like, wait, am I? And so she finally looks in the mirror and it's just like, oh my god, I'm so beautiful. And so she finally believes it. She wants to dress like it now. And so that's why her whole wardrobe kind of changes. These hiccups, man. And so that's why when Marius sees them again in the Luxembourg Gardens, she's changed so much. It's pretty much she hit puberty and learned how to dress. And meanwhile, while all this is happening, Jean Valjean is just like going through this inner turmoil because he is the stereotypical selfish, jealous dad who is like, no, this person is mine. You can't have them. I'm not sharing them at all, kind of thing. And I'm glad he didn't go the route of like scarring her or putting fucking acid on her or something to make her ugly, because like this kind of jealousy is the epitome of toxic masculinity. And it's one of the worst parts of Jean Valjean's character. But he pretty much just wants Cosette to only love him, no one else. And it's like, newsflash, dude, like, you can love more than one person. And especially, like, when you're family, like, it just seems very strange. But on the other hand, he obviously doesn't have much experience with that. But also, like, the way she transformed also feels like more than puberty, which I know I mentioned before, because it says, this is on page 771, in less than a month, little Cosette, in her solitude off the Rue de Babylone, was not merely one of the prettiest women in Paris, which is saying a great deal, but one of the best dressed, which is saying even more. She wished that she could meet that man in the street again, just to show him, or hear what he had to say. The truth is that she was ravishing in all respects, and wonderfully able to distinguish between a hat by Gerard and one by her beau. And Jean Valjean observed this transformation with the utmost misgiving. He who felt that he could never do more than crawl, or at the best walk, watched while Cosette grew wings. So she is basically flourishing in her innocence and youth and all of that, while Jean Valjean is just kind of like stewing in his misery. And the next chapter is The Battle Begins. So I'm assuming this is going to talk about more of how she's trying to communicate with Marius, their time in the Luxembourg Gardens, and their weird little thing there. But I am wondering how long it's going to be before Marius and Eponine show up again. Like, okay, I feel like we're kind of caught up a bit, although I guess it could go into the whole debacle with the Thénardiers and everything, so I'm assuming it might do that. Maybe that's where the rest of this book goes. Oh, I didn't think about that till just now. Well, that's gonna be my assumption for now. Besides that, like, nothing is really going on this week. It's just another one of those weeks where it's like every day's in the 90s, so we don't want to go outside or go anywhere. So it's just like not much to film. Yet again in the kitchen. I'm actually getting ready to chop up just about everything because I need to, well, I'm going to be making stir fry for dinner tonight, and then tomorrow is chicken salad, and so I'm just going to chop everything now so I don't have to do it later because I just have to finish it in a few hours anyway. I'm about to get started on that, but I wanted to get this film first and done with. So we actually had a pretty busy morning. This was the first time where we decided that we want to like kind of plan the week's meals out in advance, like the dinners, because for me, trying to plan dinner every day is literally the worst thing in existence. I absolutely hate it. We both do. And so basically, oh, okay, Dorothy is here. She has arrived. So basically I planned out the next week's meals, And this morning we went to Leclerc, which is a bit far away, like we have to take a bus to get there. So we got everything on our list and everything. And then at 11 this morning was the start of Pokemon Community Day. So we were walking around in our area, catching shiny Pokemon and stuff, and also looking for a freaking pharmacy that is open in August because I needed to get my pills. And then tomorrow we are actually going to go see the movie Nope that is finally out here. I know it came out last week or the week before in the US, so we got it just a little bit later. Okay, she's rubbing on the book now. But anyway, I just read my chapter today and I read one yesterday, and it's pretty much the same old stuff. The one chapter was talking about pretty much how Marius and Cosette fell in love. It's really short though, and it's pretty much they looked at each other, their eyes met, and they instantly fell in love. That's pretty much how it is. But it does go into a little bit of detail about how Cosette never learned what love was because they never used that word in the convent. Instead, they would talk about like doves and things like that. So she doesn't really understand what she's feeling. And look at this cat girl. So she doesn't really understand what's happening or anything like that. She just knows she likes this feeling, kind of thing. And then the very last little paragraph of that chapter, this is on page 775, says, "Thus did Cosette gradually grow into womanhood, beautiful and ardent, conscious of her beauty but ignorant of her love, and for good measure a coquette by reason of her innocence." And this is when Jean Valjean is starting to freak out more because he's so afraid of losing her. And so the next chapter is called Sickness and Sadness, and that's pretty much more of what this is about. And so like while they're in the Luxembourg Gardens, Valjean is constantly eyeing Marius. He does not like him at all, and he ends up pointing him out to Cosette and is like, "That's a very dull looking young man." And she pretty much is just like, "Oh, that one over there." And so Jean Valjean is like, "Oh my god, she hadn't even noticed him. Like, now I've pointed him out. Why have I done this to myself?" And so he is just like lamenting over this. And this is pretty much right after that happens. This is on page 776. It says, "And there is another law applying to those youthful years of agitation and turmoil, those frantic struggles of first love against first impediments. It is that the girl never falls into any trap and the young man falls into all of them." Torti puissant. Jean Valjean opened a secret campaign against Marius, which Marius, in the spell of his youthful passion, quite failed to perceive. Valjean devised countless snares. He changed the time of their visits, changed the bench, came to the garden alone, dropped his handkerchief, and Marius was caught out every time. To every question mark planted under his nose by Valjean, he responded with an ingenuous yes. Meanwhile, Cosette remained so solidly fenced in with apparent indifference and unshakable calm that Valjean ended by concluding, "The young fool's head over heels in love with her, but she doesn't even know he exists." So, hey. So he's pretty much convinced that like Marius is just gonna like swoop in and take her away, but he's kind of comforted by the fact a bit that she's not noticing him, but obviously that's not the case. She's just very sly about it. "Hey, you can't have celery. Please stop." And they did move because of Marius like inquiring, like following them home and asking like the doorman and stuff. Like that is why they stopped going to the Luxembourg Gardens. So like those assumptions are correct. But Jean Valjean does notice that this has affected Cosette. Like every time he asks her if she's okay, she's like, "I'm fine, father." And she acts exactly the same towards him. But he does notice that there's like this melancholy about her. But they never like voice anything to each other. They don't voice their problems, troubles, anything at all. And the last paragraph of this chapter on page 779 is, "Thus those two beings, so exclusively and touchingly devoted, who had lived so long for each other alone, came to suffer side by side, each through the other, without ever speaking of the matter, without reproaches, each wearing a smile." And I don't know, I find some of that to be quite powerful, actually. Like, it's sad, obviously, which I mean is what this entire book is, but it's just so interesting where it's like they are like the only people in each other's lives, but they don't talk about it. They won't talk about what's bothering them, and that just causes more issues, kind of thing. And the next chapter is called The Chain Gang, so I think this is going to be when it gets into what happened at the Thénardier house. And I think it's also a longer chapter, and Torty is just messing with everything I have on this counter. So I expected to do this while I started chopping stuff, but I guess I just did this on my own. So I'm going to get started on that. And today's Saturday, so I guess that's the end of this week's reading vlog. Like I said before, not much going on with the heat and everything. We're pretty much just doing stuff on the weekends only, since those actually have tended to be some of the cooler days. But thank you for hanging out with me. It is always appreciated. We will see what happens in Les Miserables next week. And until next time, bonne journée and au revoir as Torty walks by.